So today we're going to talk about radiance, the 10th power. And radiance we're going to approach both as a power in the universe and a mode of perception. So it's interesting to be talking about radiance in the middle of this period of destruction, but they're profoundly related. That's one of the hopes I have, that you'll see how connected this whole question of radiance is to the way we're destroying the planet. See, we're actually destroying the most beautiful part of the universe that we know of. Just the fact of that has got to occupy our thinking. That we would just serve up such beauty to destruction is it's almost too much to bear. Just thinking of the barbaric actions that are taking place on this planet now. Just overwhelming. We all feel it. And I think there's a very profound connection between what's taking place and a distortion of human perception. So I'd like to make that, I hope to make that clear. I'm going to start off with a story that gives you an idea of how I'm thinking about this. A friend of mine invented the first robotic telescope. So it's guided entirely by a computer. And then what you do is you put it on top of a mountain and bolt it down, and then you have it controlled by a lab somewhere else. It's great. So it tracks the sky, and you don't have to wait up all night long to actually look. So there's the interesting part here is that the human eye is taken out of the equation. So now it's just this telescope that's looking with no one there actually. But then it even gets better, because after the data is received, and some great stuff, right? That is transferred to a computer where it's crunched, right? And then stored. The whole process is free of the human eye, the human soul, human subjectivity. We've got tons of data that's never been analyzed or looked at, really, by humans. Really, really bizarre. And I think that is directly connected to the idea that you don't need the human eye to see what's there. The idea is that the machine can capture what is there because we've identified ourselves with the machine. Our view of ourselves is that we're something like a really advanced computer. And so using that image of who we are, it ends up distorting the truly deep part of human sensibility. All goes together. Now, so if you have an image of the universe as mechanical, an image of the human as mechanical, you end up living a mechanical kind of life. And all of this fits in very nicely with the dominant paradigm, which is one of use. If we are here just to use the world, then there's no difficulty whatsoever in imagining we're like a computer. So I want to suggest that our way forward in terms of this particular power, but in terms of the human species as a whole, has to do with activating the depths of human perception, and to be able to tell ourselves a story of our own perception so that we're not pulled off into this strange view of ourselves as being like a machine. It's like that. It's somewhat like this new form of self-storage, where you can actually order the goods from the warehouse and have it sent right to the self-storage. The same idea, all right? We're finding a way to eliminate the middle person, right? And just let the artifacts live our lives for us. So to approach this question of radiance, I wanted to start talking about how things do radiate in the universe. And the most powerful presence of radiance is the sun. So you have the sun just overwhelming us with its radiance. And with the sun and throughout, I'm going to suggest that there are two levels to the radiance. So to start off with the sun. Sun creates helium in its core. So it does this amazing thing. It brings together hydrogen. It compresses the hydrogen into helium. And then there's a release of light. First point to notice is this. The light wasn't there until it was created. Really interesting. So we call particles of light photons. And so we have this, all these photons are arriving here from the sun. That's the radiance of the sun. But the photons are not like little tiny BBs that are inside some kind of purse, in the sun, and then sort of released and thrown. That's the amazing thing. The photons are generated by the process of fusion. So it radiates. It releases this light. It creates the light. And then this amazing process of transmission of light. If it were just BBs, like little particles thrown from the sun to the earth, we could handle that. But it is so mysterious because the light emanates as wave. And then it doesn't actually become a photon until the interaction itself. So you have this mysterious emanation of light as a wave, and then suddenly this collapse of the wave down into the particle photon. And there's the light being created. And so we're bathed with this radiant energy from the sun. Great. All right. So we say we can see the sun. There it is. We see the light from the sun. We got all that down. But the sun is also giving off something else. And our model of this, I'm now talking about the gravitational interaction. So the sun is giving off messenger particles that mediate the gravitational interaction. They're called gravitons. I mean, gravitons, photons, you can see how physicists have put this together. But now there's another level of perception is required here on the part of the earth. When the light comes from the sun, the interaction takes place at the surface with the electrons at the surface of the earth. So you have the photons interacting with the electrons. But now you have these gravitons flooding us, the waves of gravitons. They penetrate all the way into the earth. So it's a depth interaction, not just at the surface. And here's the amazing thing. The interaction creates the gravitational attraction. That is one major event. You know how big the earth is? You know how heavy it is? Right. In other words, it's being pulled toward the sun because of this interaction. But now, ready for this? Here's the amazing part. Gravitons, okay, the hypothesized messenger particle of the gravitational interaction. Gravitons have zero rest mass. So you have particles with zero rest mass arriving here and generating an enormous response, namely pulling the Earth actually toward the sun. So this is a model. I'm trying to suggest this as a model for thinking about interaction in general. I'm saying that the radiance of the sun is in terms of light that we can see. It's in terms of gravity that we can feel. It's another level. Now, I want to move to the moon, and talk about the same thing, radiance of the moon. The moon isn't creating light by means of fusion in its center like the sun is. So it's a different situation. But here's the amazing thing, is that the photons that are coming from the moon come out of the interaction of the light from the sun with the moon. And here's the news right here. The interaction creates the moon's light. Once again, it's not that. Here's what we thought before, quantum physics. We thought light was like something that bounced, like a BB or something that went from the sun, bounced off the moon, and bounced toward us. So we're just seeing the photons from the sun. That's not what happens. Because once the light from the sun reaches the moon, it interacts with the moon, and there is no longer that photon. It's gone in the interaction. But in the interaction, the moon creates a new photon that didn't exist before, and it releases it. So when we look at moonlight, we're looking at what the moon has created. That's the thrilling understanding that comes out of quantum electrodynamics. So that would be the first level of perception of the moon's radiance. But again, here's the second one. The moon is bathing us with gravitation. It's bathing us with gravitons, just like the sun. And just like the sun, the Earth is responding to all of this flood, this flood of gravitons. And it responds, it's moved by this interaction. And it expresses its movement with the tides. It's just so great to go down and just hang out by the ocean and just sit there and feel the way in which the Earth is responding to the depth perception it has of the moon. Now, I know when I talk about the Earth having a depth perception, it can be misinterpreted. I don't mean it in the way that it's wrong. I mean it in the way that's right, okay? So I just want to avoid that misinterpretation. I mean that the Earth now is responding to something that's taking place. And it is, once again, a massless particle that's creating an amazing, massive movement on the part of Earth. I think human perception is exactly the same. It has these two parts. Now, human perception is unitary. When I say it has these two parts, I mean just for the point of discussion, we can talk about these two elements of human perception. That's all. It's unitary. But there are these two parts. You can call them the surface and the deep, right? You can call them the immediately presented, right? And the causal. The different ways people have talked about these two. But my basic hypothesis here, for you to think about, is that we've sliced off the deep perception, and we've identified our perception with just the surface because of this identification with machines. So that in the current paradigm's way of understanding human perception, it's broken, and we're taking a part as being the whole. And that's why, for instance, if you're going to have a high-level cabinet meeting in really any modern country, you're going to gather together people that are dealing entirely at that superficial level. Superficial is too strong, but the surface level, that which is presentationally immediate. And so you're dealing with the empirical facts and figures of the mathematicians, the physicists, and the economists. And upon that, you're making your decision. You're not listening to the artists and the musicians and the poets. So that whole realm of actually perceiving what's there is pushed aside. And we're making decisions based on just this broken perception. Here's an interesting little fact. Everything gives off light at all times. Now, sometimes we can see it and sometimes we can't, because the light it releases could be in the visible spectrum, it might be outside of it. But it is an ongoing, incessant activity of the universe to radiate. All the things of the universe are radiating. That's the power of radiance. It's happening. No matter, you can hide it in the very center of the earth, keep it far, 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 far away from the sun. No matter what it is you're talking about, it is radiating light. And so it's this question of what's the way to think about that? What is really happening? And so I want to begin by saying one way to approach this is that the radiance of the things of the universe is the primary language of the universe. It is the primary way the universe communicates with itself. It's way, way deeper than human language. It's way, way more primordial than human language. But it's a way to begin thinking about radiance. And it's the way the universe makes things happen. Like we're talking about the sun and the earth. That's a form of communication, deep, deep primal communication. Now there's a number of ways to talk about this. One of the people I like a lot on this is a French philosopher, Bachelard, and he has these two words I think are so great. He's talking about the way in which we enter into a relationship with radiance. And the first step is resonance. We enter into resonance with the radiance in the universe, or from some particular point or source. And this would be what I was trying to get at with the word surface, enter into resonance. But if the resonance is deep enough, it fills the being, and we move to the level of reverberation. It's a great word. The resonance penetrates so deeply that the being begins to reverberate with the radiance it is responding to. And you can see already, we can begin to see the way in which, in this form of understanding, the radiance becomes the being. So we're resonant with another, but when we begin to reverberate, we are in a non-dual relationship with the other, because we're reverberating at the very center of our being with that energy. My suggestion for your reflection is that this actually is how we do experience the world, even though we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in these terms. I think ultimately this is how we go through our day, with this kind of resonance and reverberation. Or I can put it this way too. Our best moments are characterized by this. And I'm trying to suggest that this is the mainstream way of perceiving the world. And the idea that we're machine-like is a distortion, and that's something that we are attempting to move beyond as we move into another era, a new paradigm. This one man told me a story one time. I thought it was such a great illustration of this experience. He was 14 years old and lived back eastern United States. And he was overcome by life in general, and especially storms. He loved to see rainstorms. So one day, he got his hand-cranked record player, right? And he had Beethoven's Fifth in 5 records. And while the storm was coming on, he charged up to the top of this hill, right? And as it's crashing down upon him, he's there cranking out Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And I just thought, that is resonance and reverberation entirely. He was just being spoken to at some deep level. You know, I talk about communication. This is the way in which the universe is addressing us. He felt addressed. He felt he was responding to the voices of the universe. And just that moment, that fullness, it ended up not determining, but it ended up influencing the decisions he made for the rest of his life. It was a intuitive thing. It just happened. And yet it turned out to be an encounter with the radiance of the universe that ended up defining him. So this is why I love the word reverberation, because it's finding our core identity in the midst of the voices of the universe, listening to the deep voices of the universe, the earth and universe. And in what wakes up so powerfully that you become it, we discover who we are. So already you can see the outlines of the task of radiance. So to become the human form of radiance, you can already begin to see what's required. One way to say it is that we need to develop a gentle spirit, or a subtle spirit, would be better. A subtle spirit that can respond to the depth of spirit in another person, another thing, another event. So there's another way to say it is this, that we have to develop the container that will hold this kind of beauty. And we are so well shaped for this task. That's the great thing. This has to do with the ultimate role of the human. It's not taking on something that's alien to us. It's taking on something that's intrinsically of our nature. So to develop the sensitivity, the subtleness, so that we can actually contain what it is. And the way I like to think about it is that the way in which I've discussed it here in a number of these presentations is that every being you encounter contains 14 billion years of radiance. So it's each being you come across has had 14 billion years of radiance compressed into it. And so that the great thrill of being a human is to interact, to resonate, and so that suddenly all of that radiance begins to reverberate out. That's the possibility for the human. And once again, you can see here how impossible it would be to approach this if you're constantly telling yourself, like we do in the dominant paradigm, that things are just what they seem. They're just this stuff here. It's just stuff you're going to use for the economy. The economy is going to determine whether or not it has value and all the rest of it. If we're constantly telling ourselves this, then we just slide right into consumerism. We don't even notice what we're using. We touch it for a minute and a half and it ends up in the toxic dump. You see, all of this is the opposite of recognizing that you're surrounded by beings that are just crammed with radiance. I'd like to just give some examples of the fullness of human experience. And really the reason I've given the examples is to ease ourselves into realizing that this really is home base for us. Responding to the depth of things is really home base. Even though we live in a culture that's telling itself the story about what human perception is. But we would just slow down for a second and think and reflect on our lives, we realize it's not true of us. It really isn't. The archetypal example of depth perception is a mother beholding her child. Now, the part I want you to focus on is the eyes, so that what is the mother seeing in the eyes of her child? Now, you don't need to talk her into realizing that she is seeing at a depth perception. She's seeing and beholding a magnificent beauty. And this is, we talked about this last time in terms of the sea lion. And so the sea lion is able to really go beyond the veil of the surface and to see into the depth of the pup. And this, really, I'm just taking this as the archetype of this kind of perception. But another one that we're so aware of, and it really worth reflecting on, is when we look in another's eyes. What do we see when we look into another person's eyes? If you analyze it scientifically, you say, well, I see this color and I see the flicker of eyelashes, and then I make certain kind of conclusions about what the person might be thinking. See, all of that's the machine mentality. That's all. It's just taking the surface level and trying to use the surface level empirical details with a rationally functioning brain to arrive at an understanding of what you're beholding. But what I'm trying to suggest is that what's flowing out of the eye, we're radiating. What's radiating out of the person is the essence of the person. It's the fullness of the person. It's just like what's radiating out of the sun. It's light, but it's also this depth. And so we begin to realize that the light itself is a flow of emotion. So that we have light as emotions, light as delight, light as joy, light as sadness. And what's so incredible is the way in which these forms shift and change, so that it's ultimately unfathomable what is pouring out from another. And even to this extent that we can, in a glance, think of what has happened to you, to us, with a glance. One glance, and you can fall in love so deeply, the rest of your life is changed. I mean, the rest of your life. And what is it? A glance. A glance. In other words, there's a way in which we have the power of actually containing the radiance that's streaming out of another. And that is the power of depth perception. That's the reverberation. Suddenly you realize, you know what? Everything has changed. I am going to actually go and live on this mountain because what I've seen is so powerful, so amazing. Everything I ever thought, and so forth. So that would be perception at the level of depth and reverberation. Another thing to reflect on is experiences like this. It's late at night and you can't sleep. And so you get up and you wander outside and you glance up and you see the stars. And you're overwhelmed. In fact, you're awestruck. You're just taken out of yourself. All of the difficulties you had and so forth, they just melt away into their proper context. And suddenly they're flooded with this peace. Deep, deep peace. What's the use mentality interpretation of this, right? The use mentality interpretation of this, you're just seeing points of light, all right? It's activating some kind of idea in you, and you've talked yourself into forgetting about your troubles for a minute or two. And so in other words, that's the mentality that does away with actually beholding the night sky. And so then you build your robotic telescopes but what's the interpretation that I'm trying to suggest you reflect on? What we know is that something glorious is streaming into us. That's what we know. And it is so deeply felt that we find the peace of our proper place in the universe. And we're at peace because we're at home. We feel so deeply at home. Or the experience of, now I'm talking about the universe in a vast sense, of course, but it's not the size, it's the depth perception. You could look down in that moment and you could see fireflies twinkling about you, beneath you. In fact, in a moment of vertigo, you could imagine that you're still looking up, and you're looking down, the fireflies. And then to move into that reality, the fireflies are flashing because they're attempting to interest their mates in coming hither. Yeah. And so here you find yourself, you're part of the whole love play. You're in the middle of all of this deep feeling. No. You think animals have feelings? Is that what you said? In the use world, there's no feelings. They're just flacking these lights on. They don't know what to do, this instinct and all the rest of it. You see, in other words, we tell ourselves these stories. But when you're there in the fireflies, and you see them all flashing, and you know this is their whole mating ritual, suddenly you realize you're participating in an amazingly sacred event. And once again, you find yourself at home at home in magnificence. I think all of us, humans, on one level or another, have a sense of being drawn to the depths of things. And when we can find a way to go there, we really do find what I think is the future of the human. We find the direction for the human. And it can happen in any possible way. I've talked about the light in the eye of another human. One of my favorite experiences is of precious stones. I just can't get over this, that the earth makes precious stones, like rubies and sapphires. And when you actually look at it, you find out that if you analyze it scientifically, you find out that sapphires are made of things like aluminum, and oxygen, right? And they, but the stuff that, aluminum and oxygen, but it comes together and then it just explodes. It sparkles. Like right now, throughout the Earth's crust, there are all these precious stones. They've all just exploded into being. And they're radiant. They're released in their radiance. And so here you are, you come across a precious stone, and it's sparkling, it's brilliant, it's as if the universe really is trying to tell you something. And it's like, even with these stones, they are revealing their aliveness. They're just almost saying, this is what's possible, this is what's coming. They're not alive, but yet they live in that realm of possibilities. Or I've talked about the moon with the ocean, but just to return to that, you go and you sit by the ocean, and it's the same experience as looking at the night sky. The kind of fuzziness and distortions of the day and of the civilization drop away, and then you're drawn into what is really real. And what is really real is addressing you. What is really real is attempting to establish a deep bond with you. And the amazing thing is, in those moments, we can feel, say if you're a poet, you're drawn to give expression to something. And what I find so interesting about that is that it's as if the magnificence of the ocean and the sand, in the sky, requires something. It's asking something. It's asking for a depth perception, but there's something that is there that wants to be sparkling forth like the sapphire in the human being. Doesn't necessarily mean that one has to write a poem, but in what comes forth, what reverberates out, in some mysterious way feels as if it's completing the beauty that's there, or can feel that way. I want to talk a little bit about some of the qualities of a personality or a psyche that is given to this power of radiance. So the universe complexifies for 13.7 billion years, and some humans are seemingly designed for radiance. They're especially fitted for becoming radiance in the form of conscious self-awareness. So it would be some of the kind of traits. One would be a person who puts up an easy and automatic resistance to authority. And I thought about this for a while. And I thought about, is this really accurate? And it's because in our particular society, right? In our particular society, those forms of authority are usually built around a distorted perception of the world. So there's a natural movement, a resistance to the forms of authority. And in other words, it's being drawn into one's own authority, sort of naturally, in an industrial society. Another aspect of this is such people tend to do the minimum amount that's required to survive. Just the minimum. And, again, I thought, because this is sort of just sort of observing people, but I thought, why is that the case? Once again, it's because in a consumer society, right, we are shaped very early on to want more than we need, to work harder than we have to, and all the rest of it, so that what seems like a minimum amount is actually just all you need, right? But they come across as people that are trying to just do the minimum amount and then get out of all the rest of the work. And so they, why? Because they need lots of time alone. And why do they need time? They need time to be. The power of radiance requires contemplation. Necessarily is asking for contemplation. And I thought of connecting these words with more traditional words. Resonance is the primary form of prayer in the universe. And reverberation is the primary sacrament in the universe, to use these more traditional words. So resonance, to enter into resonance, is to enter into contemplation, is to find a way to enter deeply into things. And reverberation, then, I mean, I say use the word sacrament, I mean it literally. Reverberation, then, is when you become radiant. You become the radiance that is flooding the world. Oh, yeah. There's this type of person is also given to display. So this is the reverberation, and so there would be a natural love of clothing and jewelry and pageantry. See, going back through history too, it's just a love of display. And I'm laughing because I remember the story of that Tennessee Williams told, which I love so much. I thought it really captured the personality that's given to radiance here. He was down in Mississippi, and he was looking at these three little girls. They're like 5 or 6, and they're dressed up in their mother's clothing, right? So that they have these long gowns on that go all the way to the ground. They have these giant high heels and necklaces that go down to their knees, right? And so they're clopping along there on the side of this dusty road and talking and so forth. And suddenly one of them, got frustrated. And she said, and she turned to the other two and she said, "Look at me. Look at me. Look at me." And then she fell over backwards into a bush with her feet went up. And Tennessee Williams was sitting there thinking, I wonder if she's not a Southern rider now. But see, it's the desire to display because one has a sense of the divine essence one is. So it's a realization that everything is to be admired. Everything. So the movement into radiance is the movement into the capacity to respond to the radiance filling the universe and to respond to the radiance within. So it's to recognize it and to feel it. It's surging out of us. This question of admiration. To admire means to wonder at. And it means to actually to create a smile. So it's this view of the universe that is, it's just one wonder after another. Everything is a source of radiance and a display of divine beauty. Then there's the question of what is it that prevents our movement into radiance? And I've talked about this distortion of human perception, but I just want to talk about this a little more generally, just to give you a feel for it. There's a way in which all of the powers are attempting to bring forth radiance. And this is true of all of the other powers as well. Let me say it again. All the powers of the universe are one. We're talking about them as if they were 10. That's just so we can understand. But they're all seamlessly involved with each other. And so, and they are present at every point in the universe. They're present in every being in the universe. They are what is coursing through us. Because from the beginning of time, a radiant energy is coursing through the universe. All the powers are attempting to bring forth radiant humans. Would be an example. One of the ways in which one might not be totally fulfilled and radiant is because of lack of confidence or a sense of doubt. So rather than recognizing those feelings that are rushing through us as the urge of the universe to appear as you uniquely, there's that need. If you don't appear as you, then that radiant energy will never display itself. So why would that not happen? Because we'll talk ourselves into not being ourselves. Or we'll have doubts about what it is that's surging through us. Why would we have these kinds of doubts? Because centration has not been able to work deeply within us. See, the power of centration is necessary for us to arrive at a place of power, of confidence, to be uniquely the radiant form we are. Another example would be this. Why is it that we, rather than responding to the depth of things, we just make consumer items? We push them at each other. We go to war over them. Why is that? Because the power of allurement has not been fully active in your life and drawn you beyond the surface into the depth of things. So allurement is attempting to draw us into what is truly beautiful, what is truly alluring. But if it's half-baked in us, then we stay with the level of trinkets. You know, things like what's keeping the Dow Jones going. You know, it's not the depth of things. Another example would be that holds us away from radiance would be a worldview of materialism. So a one-dimensional, flattened-out worldview. And this is what is being taught, right, in a culture of consumerism. So that's the fourth power, homeostasis. It's the way in which a dominant paradigm is holding humans in what is ultimately a subhuman state of being. And what would be finally, just to give you one more example, would be keeping people back from entering in fully would be anger, revenge, fantasies, bitterness, cynicism. So we lock ourselves up in these tiny worlds rather than creating a container to receive magnificence. Well, what keeps us locked up into cynicism and so forth? A failure of the power of transmutation. Transmutation, the way in which the universe calls upon each of us to deepen, to transmute. So I just thought this would be one way of thinking about how one could say all of the powers of the universe are attempting to bring forth humans capable of responding to radiance and to becoming radiance, all of them. So you can see this as a kind of culmination, really, of the whole. I want to end with just a last image in terms of what we're involved with here. Talked about it in terms of individual humans moving into the power of radiance, but also culture as a whole, a society. And I had this experience. It was really an amazing moment for me. I was at at Eleusis, where the Eleusinian mysteries were celebrated. And it was an amazing moment. And I got to the place where the humans walked into the temple. Now this was, you have to understand, this was the dominant religious rite of that part of the world for almost 2,000 years. And so all of the people, Plato and Socrates, all the playwrights, they all, not every one, but a huge number of them made their way to the Eleusinian mysteries. And we still don't know what actually took place there, because it was, if you told anyone, you were murdered. Murdered, executed. So it was, it tended to keep people careful about talking. So anyway, but I was there, and this was a huge impact on human consciousness. And right at the gate, there was at a wooden gate, and the stone, this huge stone, had been carved by the gate, just opening and closing. So the rut was, say this deep. And I just sat there and I just thought, wow. I mean, this ritual, in other words, was performed over and over and over again and slowly worked its way into human consciousness. And with that kind of a dedication, it's something like that we're about right now. We're about a transformation that is even deeper than that, because this involves the entire planet, not just one group of people. But it's going to require a kind of dedication and ongoingness. Who knows how long? But I thought, when has this happened before? And the time that I was thinking about was, in terms of the life world, was my favorite was photosynthesis. If you go back 3.9 billion years, photosynthesis was what everyone was, it was the rage. I mean, it was like, this is what we're really going to focus on, right? It wasn't the cosmological powers, it was this new thing, photosynthesis. And they had to work and work and work and work. They had to keep trying and so forth and put it together. And that's kind of like, I think, where we're at. We're not doing something just as individuals, but we're attempting to create a culture that will make it easy to be good, in particular. It will be easy to enter into the radiance of the universe, as easy as those cells could enter into resonance with the sunlight. Now it's automatic, like every tree, hey, we've got it done. Whereas where we're at right now is that we have, we're just overwhelmed with these sad, barbaric practices, right? But one by one they will evaporate as we learn how to put together a culture and society that is based on the aim of bringing forth the sheen in every child's face.